Hello everyone and welcome to our latest webinar. Today we're going to be talking about the STAR tool, SAP's STAR tool, and how you can understand the output and how you can understand the risks associated with that output. With me today I have Joanna. Joanna is one of our technical experts in VOQUZ Labs. I'm very happy to have her on the call today. And maybe you can introduce yourself, Joanna. Just say hi.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Hi, Tony. As Tony said, I'm part of VOQUZ delivery team. So basically, my responsibility is to deliver, install, configure our software asset management tool, SAMQ, for most customers.
Perfect. And she does it very, very well. So let's move on to today's topic. Okay, so it's the S/4HANA Trusted Authorization Review, STAR as SAP calls it. So where did this come about? Well, as you're all aware, S/4HANA is alive and kicking. SAP is saying everyone needs to move to it by 2027, and that is going to have an impact on your licensing setup with SAP. Now, one of the most important aspects of licensing, of course, is your named user licenses or your user licenses, and SAP has come up with the STAR tool as a service. They say to help you do the analysis on your requirements in the future world. So it's good to note that USMM doesn't do this. This is something completely different to USMM. USMM, of course, is for audit purposes, and SAP is advertising STAR as purely a service-based approach so that customers understand their licensing requirements. Now, one massively important thing to consider is that this analysis is based on authorizations. So when I say that, I mean it's the technical authorizations that your users are provided with to enable to do their functional transactions within SAP. Now, I've been doing SAP licensing for a long time, arguably too long, but that's a different story. And I've come across very few customers who actually have their authorization and roles completely up to date. In fact, I've come across customers that literally have 10,000 roles and only 3,000 employees. So you can see that over time, the authorization and role concepts gets diluted by various different facets, none of it being deliberate. But whether it's time, whether it's effort, whether it's a little bit of lack of control in the GRC concept and making sure that everyone gets what they need, it's one of those aspects of SAP usage that is sort of a known unknown. So this is what we need to be careful with.
Maybe one thing I'd like to add here is that it's not just being completely up to date. It's also knowing what you're supposed to be updating. There's some little things. Maybe we'll go into this in a few slides later, show you some examples. But the idea is you need to know what to do to modify the roles. It's little things like having a star in the activity instead of explicitly saying the activity create or change in there. So being up to date and aware of what the SAP's best practices are in order to reduce the license output.
Absolutely. So the point, I guess, here is that STAR tool is based on authorizations, and authorizations can go wrong very, very easily. So let's have a look though. I don't want to be too critical of the STAR tool because there are some good things about it. So let's look at the good things first. So it is easy to use. SAP has made it very easy to deploy, and you can get data really quite quickly. It is accurate to a certain extent. It's accurate in the concept of it does look at your authorizations. It does look at what you've authorized your people to do. And let's look at that when we go to the next slide in the cons aspect as well. But number 3 is an important point on this slide. You don't have to submit this data to SAP. You can keep it in your environment. You can do the analysis yourself or with a partner such as VOQUZ Labs. So you're not forced to share it with SAP. SAP asks you to share it with them. Of course they do, but you don't have to. Let's just go on to the con side of this conversation. As we discussed a minute ago, it's based on authorization, and that's rarely maintained effectively. The STAR analysis is a generic tool, so it goes out to all customers in exactly the same way. There's no customization to your contract or to your usage scenarios or how you're using the software. So there's room for problems there.
If I can add here, it goes out to customers exactly the same way to a point, because it is also relatively frequently changed and updated, both from a technical point of view, the node which installed in the system, but also the rule metrics is being updated periodically with not exactly sure what, but I'm assuming depending on feedback and their experience with the results.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we can only assume that the updates are meant to make the tool better.
Yes.
I'm assuming. But obviously, there's an inherent risk in that if you ran STAR 3 months ago, you may have got very, very different results than if you ran it today. And if SAP is trying to tell you your licenses 3 months ago and you ran it again and you've got a completely different scenario, then obviously there's an inherent risk there as well. But let's have a look at an example. Maybe, Joanna, you can take us through the next slide and show us some of the risks that can occur.
Yes. So just to explain again, the tool is looking at the authorizations, the authorization objects, and the activity in the authorizations. So we have first an example of a role called a travel manager role, where the activity is listed with a star for one object. So basically everything would be allowed. That simple star in there is causing the entire role and the users who have this role assigned to be interpreted as professionals by STAR because of the asterisk wildcard in the authorization stars. There's too many stars. So if the STAR activity would be changed to allowing create activity, change activity, display, deletion, and so on, would be fine. But because the wildcard implies it's allowing also activity type 42, and I believe it says 85, which are release and reverse. For that reason, everybody with that role is being seen as professional. So it's, we spoke earlier about it, that you can have your authorizations up to date, but these little small things could have big implications in the outcome. And in the lower part of the screen, we have an example or a situation from a customer of ours where a basic role, an end user role assigned to every dialog user in the system has some an authorization object with an activity combination that's causing everybody in their landscape, all dialog users, to be considered professionals because they're allowing add and create or change authorization profiles. So in this case, it's a bit more critical. In this case, I mean, probably best practices wouldn't say you should allow users to modify authorization profiles, but with the travel manager role on top of the slide, it's just a small thing that could have bigger implications.
And as you say, Joanna, this, at least the bottom one, came from a real life situation with one of our customers. And the obvious question that they asked was, what do we do about this? How can we correct the situation so that we don't have this potential threat in our SAP environment? Mm-hmm. So maybe if we move on just to the next slide, we can see that VOQUZ Labs has a couple of solutions to this. We have tooling around optimization of your licenses, and we have tooling around making sure your authorizations are not up to date, to use Joanna's phrase, but accurate, that they accurately reflect what your users actually need to do in the system. So SAMQ is, as I say, our license optimization tool based on actual usage in the SAP system. So if we move on just quickly to the next slide, we can see this is what we recommend that customers do before they submit their SAP data to SAP. And I've put a cheeky little asterisk there, you know, if ever. Do you really want to share this information with SAP? That's something that every customer will need to decide for themselves. So if ever. So the first thing you need to do, of course, is to understand exactly what licenses you really require. Our recommendation is always that is based on actual usage requirements. So SAMQ is a tooling that looks at every user in the environment, looks at what they actually need to do in their day-to-day jobs, and then assigns the most cost-optimal license to those users. STAR, we've already spoken about, so we know how STAR works based on authorizations. If you compare the two, we very often see significant differences. So STAR will be saying something based on authorizations, and you saw previously how that can easily come about with something that customers may not even realize is going to have that impact. And then we recommend to customers that whether they use our tooling, whether they do it themselves, whether they do it manually, that some effort goes into updating the existing roles in the organization. One thing that I forgot to mention earlier, and it is an important point, the SAP's standard licensing model is based on authorized to perform. So if you're authorized to do something in the system, SAP's licensing definitions do say that pure authorization means you need to be a particular license type. 20 or 30 years ago, that wasn't necessarily true. I used to see lots of definitions saying perform as opposed to authorized to perform. But nowadays, authorized to perform is the standard. So STAR, and let's be fair, STAR is doing what SAP says. Except, of course, if you've given people authorizations they don't need, then you're giving them licensing they don't need, and you're paying costs that you don't need to. And that's why we're having this sort of two-pronged approach. Make sure that you know what you need based on usage, and then make sure you update your authorizations to reflect what you actually need. Anything to add there, Joanna?
No, maybe with this example, I would want just to point out that STAR would be running in one system and assessing the authorizations of users in the main system while you're running it, where of course there's usually more than one system in an SAP landscape. Of course, depending on the customer, users might have access to multiple systems. You might not have visibility running STAR in only one system over the authorizations or the requirements for licensing in the entire landscape. So here we have an example. Before we go to the example, just one more sentence. When we do a SAMQ installation and SAMQ assessment of the licenses customers need, we do connect all measurements relevant systems to have the big picture, the entire picture of the user's activity and licensing needs. So to come now to this example, it's I'll explain the table and then the context a little bit more. So we have license types. In this, in the column measured in SAP, you will see the licenses that the customer assigned to their users in their landscape. You can see there they have an ECC licensing model. We then have a column called SAMQ, which would reflect the license SAMQ would recommend per user, or in this scenario, converting from S4 price list, and then the output from STAR. The customer also ran STAR. So what we do see, and no, let me just explain one more. We have one line, the first line saying none. From a SAMQ point of view, or from a measured in SAP point of view, that would be the USMM output. These users would be interpreted as professionals. Users without a license type during a measurement will be read as professionals. And
just to clarify that point for everyone, Joanna, if that's okay. So none in the measured in SAP. I'm right in understanding that means that no classification has been provided to those users.
Correct. So they have no license assigned in the system. When a USMM runs, they will be read as professionals. That's the default license type, usually in productive systems for users without a license type.
Yep.
In the column star, in the row none, we have a few users there as well, 199. It indicates that those users do not have authorizations, so star is not classifying them. They don't have roles. So what we do see here is, again, SAMQ and STAR comparison in here for the results. One more special line is SAMQ no action. With license type 81, we have 1,445 users that SAMQ identified as not having any activity in the past. I believe for this customer scenario, we had a bit longer than 4 months. So users without activity but with authorizations, our recommendation was to expire, basically deactivate the user, so they would be out of scope for SAP's measurement. USMM would not read the users, they would not need to be licensed. But of course, since these users do have authorizations, SAP STAR tool would recommend a specific license type for them based on their authorizations. We did highlight some numbers in red. Those would be the ones that we would recommend to license. Of course, the 1,500 professionals, the additional productivity and functional users compared to the users licensing based on STAR's result, based on authorizations, with 5,800 professionals.
Yes, thanks, Joanna. I mean, by the way, everyone, don't get confused by the inventory column saying 0. Of course, for real life scenario, that would have the customer's entitlement in there. But what this very clearly highlights is that exactly what we've been saying, really, that the output based on usage is often very significantly different to the output based on authorization. So based on this SAMQ result, if the customer followed our recommendations and actually deactivated those 1,445 users, they would only actually have 4,600 users left, of which only 1,500 would be professional. If they hadn't run SAMQ and they just submitted the STAR data to SAP without any checks or any validation, SAP's interpretation would have been that they required 5,841 professional users. For those of you who know SAP pricing, a professional user is not the cheapest animal on the planet. These are very, very, very significant licensing implications and costs in those numbers. So I'm hoping that that's very simple example gives you an idea of the differences that they can be.
And I would like to say one more thing so that people don't get the wrong impression here is the 5,800 users that STAR sees as professional. It's not as in the previous slide with one basic role that has a wrong star in there, one object in there causing all users to receive a professional license. It's a bit more complicated than that. It's a series of authorizations. One of it would be such a role, but it's a bunch of roles that cause users to become professionals. So removing just that object from the end user role in that scenario would not ultimately cause all users to be instantly correctly licensed. There's a series of authorizations which have these kinds of issues that lead to a higher license type. So it would imply a bit more analysis time, investigation to see which roles can be modified, if it will impact the business, the users, what the consequences might be.
Although interestingly, we both worked on that same account, and removing just one line from the authorization did actually reduce their count by over 1,000 from professional for that particular customer. So you're right, it can be more than just one line, but it can also just be one entry. It certainly needs to be investigated. Definitely. So what do we recommend as best practice? I think that we've touched on this already. It goes without saying that we're going to say use SAMQ. SAMQ, market leading license optimization tool, will analyze your environment and give you recommendations based on your actual usage requirements. You map that to STAR analysis, and included in our latest release of SAMQ, and I will say the latest release, it's only been out for a few weeks, I believe, Joanna. There's an inbuilt comparison between the STAR data. Obviously, you need to upload it, but there's an inbuilt comparison between the SAMQ output and the STAR output, so you can see exactly where the differences are, and then you can decide how you go about remedying that in the background. We obviously recommend using our tooling, using SETQ to redo your roles and your authorization concepts. But that would obviously be up to any customer to decide how they handle that. So yeah, in summary, make sure you understand your real requirements. Make sure you understand how that compares to STAR, to make sure that you don't send data to SAP that gives a misleading requirement. And then in the background, do the necessary changes on your technical side to make sure that everything maps. And I think we have some examples of what SAMQ actually does and what SETQ actually does. But we'll touch on this at a very, very high level because we have separate webinars and we have separate sessions that go into the technicalities of our tooling. But Joanna, maybe you can just talk us through this.
So maybe just some briefly about SAMQ. It has a lot of functions to allow us to be flexible in configuring the licensing. It has functionalities, of course, to allow you to compare licensing scenarios, ECC to S4 or to full user equivalence. It has functionalities to read other licensing metrics like engines, to enter prices or financials in the tool to have the comparison or the visibility. And of course, it's automating the identification of the licenses, and it's assigning the optimal licenses to users, and as well as identifying inactive users that haven't logged on, haven't accessed anything, used transactions, which the tool can expire, so that they don't cost licenses. Your licensing will be reduced. So a lot of flexibility and options for reporting and visibility and transparency in your licensing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of richness in SAMQ, and it's getting better with every release. SETQ is their GRC offering essentially. It's a very rich tool. It handles all these concepts that you see on the screen. It can be modularized, so the authorization role concepts that we spoke about in this webinar can be, as I say, isolated and sold in isolation. But SETQ is as I say, a very rich tool set. And of course, anyone who wants to see a demonstration of that can reach out to us and we can go into that in detail.
I would like to maybe highlight just one here, the role reduction manager, which is one functionality where the tool would flag roles and authorizations that have not been accessed by anybody in the landscape for a longer period. So it would give you easier or more visibility over which authorizations or roles haven't been used. And they, of course, in this context of licensing would, of course, be relevant for STAR.
Perfect. So in summary, STAR does what it says it does. It does look at your licensing based on the authorization. Does that mean that you get the licenses you actually need? Well, I think we've demonstrated that that's definitely an open question. Definitely needs to be investigated. You definitely need to look at your real requirements, and you need to make a serious consideration before you submit this data to SAP. Please just understand what it's telling SAP and what it's based on before you make any decisions on that basis. So I think that's it for it today, Joanna, I believe. Please, everyone, hang around for the Q&A, and we'll see you in a minute. Thank you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining. That was interesting and informative. Thanks, Joanna and Tony. And before we address your questions, we want to get an overview of where we all stand with STAR with a small live survey here. I'll start it right away. Your answers are anonymous and we can't see your names, so not a compliance issue there. And I'll hit it off straight away. Let me just start that. The first question is, have you heard of SAP STAR yet? Tony, is there a possibility that people haven't been confronted with STAR so far and haven't considered using it yet? What do you think?
It's possible. There's an echo, but there's definitely a possibility.
Okay, please feel free to answer. I'm going to leave this open for another 10 seconds before I close it and we see the results. So another 3. Okay, we've got 60 to 40 here. So it obviously is an issue, so good that we're talking about it. Let's go to the next one straight away. Has SAP contacted you regarding SAP STAR yet? Paul is running, okay.
I guess 40% you've never heard of it.
Let's see if this might surprise us actually. The connection with it. Another 3, 4, another 5 seconds before I close it. Okay, closing the poll now. Interesting. So we have 27 for yes and 73% for no of the ones who've heard it, as Tony just said. Let's see the next one. And this is basically a chain reaction in questions. Do you actively use SAP STAR? Quite curious about this one. Leaving it open for another 5 seconds. Closing now. Let's have a look at the results for all of us. Okay, 21% already. I wonder if this is with sort of cleaned authorizations and licenses yet. I'm going to come to that in the next questions or not. And 79% say no. And let's, in that context, ask about the plans. Do you plan to use the SAP STAR to understand your license need for a move to S4 or the cloud? Okay, another 3 seconds before I close. Sharing the results. 64 yes and 36 no. Okay, this might have changed. This might have changed after this webinar. There is the second last one. Were you aware of the need to have a strict and compliant authorization concept before efficiently using SAP STAR? Quite curious about this one. Because that would mean people are relying, everything is sort of fine, just pressing on analyze rather than cleaning up the licenses and the authorizations beforehand. Closing the question in about 3 seconds. Let's have a look at the results. Okay, 68% say yes, still 32% say no, not aware of the need to have a strict and compliant authorization concept before efficiently using SAP STAR. And then this might be the question. Do you expect to save money using SAP STAR? Closing the question in about 2 seconds. Let's have a look at the results. 45% are not expecting to save money using SAP STAR. What else would be a reason to actually use it then? What do you think, Tony? If it's not about sort of cleaning up your SAP environment, any authorizations and the licenses, and having a clear picture of it, why would you do that?
I think the expectation set from SAP is that it gives you an accurate view of your S/4HANA world. So whether it saves you money or not, it's telling people that it will provide visibility and accuracy in your licensing. So even
just for you to have an overview and know where you stand.
Exactly. So that when you move to S/4HANA or you move to wherever you go to, your licensing in SAP's view is accurate. I mean, obviously what we've been looking at very clearly indicates that may not be the case. So whether or not it shows over licensing, under licensing, whatever, I think the accuracy issue is the big problem. Not because STAR is not doing its job properly, but because in the data it's working on in the background is providing this potentially false impression of the real situation.
That's actually a good connection to the first question that came in via chat. So thanks to all of you for sending
Stefan,
all those in. Go ahead. Yeah.
Just one thing, maybe if you don't mind, jump to the last comment in the chat, because I think somebody gave a context to the question or the poll, saying because you have to use it for S/4HANA. I think that's in relation to our last question. Why are you going to use it if you're not expecting to save money? Maybe because the statement or the understanding is that you have to use it for S4.
Well, so what we're saying, this is not a choice. So it's not just, let's have a tool here. That's actually nice to have an overview, but it is. What about licenses for development activity? HA.
We haven't really spoken about this in the webinar. We focus more on the productive users, not the developers. I think it's the same situation. If users have authorizations to develop, then the STAR would flag them as developers and recommend a developer license. But I think generally this license type or the definition hasn't really changed much. Okay, technically it has. So there's no dev access table and developer access key, but it's pretty much the same general rule of identifying active developers or developers.
And one thing we have been seeing though, Joanna, is that this is only being deployed into a production environment. So
Correct.
into one environment. So yeah, I mean, arguable whether or not you'll have developers in your production system. But as Joanna says, if they have the authorizations and they're there, then they'll be highlighted as needing a developer license.
And we did mention this also earlier in the webinar that it is STAR, as you said, is supposed to be running only one system. It's supposed to be easy and quick. So if you run it in one system, you don't get the full picture of the landscape. So this is the downside, but yeah.
I'm very interested in that comment that we saw earlier, the question we saw earlier, that you have to run it if you're an S/4HANA. I'd love for that person to explain where they heard that from, whether that's just a sort of an interpretation or whether the SAP have actually told you that you must run it. It would be a very interesting statement for SAP to make.
I suggested that, good point. I suggested that if we can discuss that sort of by the person, not to name the guy, not sure about their compliance policy, to send us an email to labs@voquuzlabs.com and following up with that and actually share the insights of that anonymously with everyone who's joined this webinar with a follow-up email and findings regarding that. So everyone is on the same page. Good point.
Just to clarify,
another one. Yeah, go ahead.
So definitely what we have seen is that SAP is still offering this as a service. They're not telling customers that they must run it, and they're not telling customers. They are heavily suggesting that if they do run it, that they send SAP the data, definitely. But I personally have not come across anywhere that SAP has told someone they must run it. Just for my own observation.
Another one addressing objects. So does STAR show which authorization object a user has actually used yet or used in a role? Joanna, that might go to you.
Not used. I don't know which question this is. There's a lot of questions in there, but
that's
it's
why
not
I'm reading
showing
them
which.
out, so don't worry.
Yeah, thank you. It's not showing which authorization objects have been used. It's looking at what authorization objects are in the user's role. So not what's used, but what the user is authorized to do. Ah, okay, sorry. I see now the question. Thank you, Stefan, and also see who the question came from. Okay.
Yeah, not a problem. Yeah, as I said, so feel free to ask the questions. We're not going to sort of disclose your names, so feel free to be very sort of open about what you want to know. If you don't think this is the right environment, just send us an email coming in at labs@voquuzlabs.com, and we'll get back to you individually and actually address your individual situation and problem if you have some. So if it's here via chat or if it's coming in via email, all works for us. Talking about emails, I have one that's sort of a top level one, basically, a general one saying, does the size of the company play a role when using STAR and or your tool, referring to SAMQ, I suppose? Is there a difference?
Well, I think, I'm not sure. I mean, it comes back to in which system you're running STAR. It doesn't matter if you're running STAR for 50 users or 5,000 users. The results and the way it's interpreting or recommending the licenses or the approximation is going to be the same. Again, if you have 30 systems and you run STAR in one, it might not be the full picture of your license needs. With SAMQ, I mean, we do connect all, or like to connect all measurement relevant systems, so development and production, all clients, to get a full picture of the user's activity and license needs. And as stated, the difference would be that our tool, our preference is to go based on used activity, not authorized or authorization objects from the roles.
How often should you run STAR, and what do you need to prepare and do so? Because I think I remember Tony explaining about depending on at what timing you use it, and you might have completely different results another month or 2 or 3 months later. So is there something that we can recommend about on how often and how we sort of prepare and do this, and how much we take into account what the result is?
Okay, so the difference in the STAR results that we spoke about earlier was as a result of SAP updating the logic. So that's why we were saying that potentially you'll get different results depending on when you run it. I don't think there's any harm in running it at any time, to be perfectly honest with you. I think it's always good to have visibility on what SAP would tell you need to license based on the output. And I don't think it's ever too early to have an understanding of how that would impact you if you left it to the last minute. So I mean, we always say that proactive management of your licensing is the best approach. Don't wait until you're in an audit situation. Don't wait until SAP has put a proposal in front of you. Don't wait until you've made the internal decision to move to S/4HANA. Get a grip on your licensing up front, so that you're in control of the negotiation when you speak to SAP. So if you have access to the STAR tool, then I suggest that you run it and keep it for your own internal purposes, and do exactly what we said earlier. Make sure that you map it to your actual usage requirements so that you know where you stand.
And repeat that if necessary, if you make changes in the meantime, and sort of run it again, possibly.
Of course. So once you've made the necessary changes in your system, once you understand your real requirements, and hopefully you've made changes in your authorizations, by all means run it again to make sure it's mapping to what you are looking for it to achieve. Definitely.
Can SAMQ be tested first before we use that?
Yes. we have a quick license assessment concept, or sometimes people call it a POC, proof of concept. But yes, we have a proof of concept stroke quick license assessment concept in our licensing world. Yeah,
if anyone needs more in-depth information on that, please go to VOQUZlabs.com. This is like the classic pointing us to the website, but there is actually some useful information going in answering different types of questions, including the POC, and or send us in the questions that you have directly to labs@voquuzlabs.com. You also feel free to connect to Joanna or Tony via LinkedIn if that's your preferred way of communication. However, we are definitely in the position to help you. We have a question which I find quite good, as same as maybe slightly provocative as well. I thought it was interesting. It says, how come SAP didn't implement checking authorizations first if this is so important? I suppose it's about putting this in STAR.
Okay, so this is a very interesting question, because I used to work for SAP, and back in the day we were always being asked, you know, what T codes map to what license, what authorization maps to X, Y, and Z. And back in the day it was a very difficult answer. This is, I mean, again, I don't want to be unfair to SAP. This is an attempt by SAP to be slightly more visible, to give customers slightly more understanding of what the licensing implications are of their environment. Why didn't they do it 15, 20 years ago? Good question.
Jumping to a comment, well, if a role is not classified, none would become default license type within STAR as well.
I think I can take that, and there's a series of maybe comments or questions there. So, okay, so role not classified. So the thing, and a different question from the same person referring to the screenshots. The screenshots did come from the SAP GUI from STAR and from the rule matrix. So with USMM, if a user doesn't have a license, in a productive system, USMM will read the user as a professional. Of course, the tool would assign a license type based on activity. Our tool would do that. With STAR, the user, even if the user is not active in the system and doesn't have a license, STAR would list a license based on the user's authorizations. Only users without roles would be considered not classified. So if there is such a situation where a user exists in the system, is valid in the system, dialog account, but doesn't have authorizations, then it will not be classified. And I think there was, let me look through, there was more, yeah, one more question. We had a screenshot with the results comparing SAMQ to STAR and the customer's assignment of the licenses, and there was one line stating a license type called 81 SAMQ no T codes. That is how it's a placeholder we like to use to classify or to route users who haven't done anything in the system in a separate category, so that we can investigate further to see if they can be deactivated and save licenses, or if there's a reason for them to stay in the system. But yes, like somewhat close to inactive. Yes.
I think you covered that was a person interesting in all sorts of details. So maybe this is worth a following up afterwards. And I'm going to jump right to the next one, which is about SAMQ, asking what criteria is followed by SAMQ to map the users to different license types based on authorizations and activities. I see it's a bit different and working compared to STAR tool from SAP. Will SAP agree to this classification based on SAMQ rule sets?
So we've
this is a couple of questions in one.
Yeah, it's a couple of questions. So we've used the tool for a while now, for years now, to assign ECC licenses, and now we are adapting it to be closer to STAR or that logic. So we used, before STAR was published, we used to take just the definitions from the S4 licenses, translate them into transactions or activities in the system, and create profiles for users to be mapped to that license type if they access specific transactions. And we've done a similar approach with the STAR. So basically, we've looked at the content of the STAR's rules and applied that to the used transactions or used activity of the users in the system, not authorized again. So if it's going to be accepted, I'm not sure what to say there. Generally speaking, the license assignment or the measurement in SAP systems is still based on the signed licenses, whatever users have in SU01. Now, of course, there is some sort of question about the phrasing in customers' contracts about authorized to perform as opposed to accesses specific areas. But Tony, what do you see there, or what is your opinion on this?
To be honest, we've never been challenged, put it that way. So I'm not aware that a customer's classification based on SAMQ has ever been challenged by SAP during the standard audit. Of course, this comes back to, I guess, the basic concept of this whole webinar. Of course, if you send SAP STAR output and you send SAP SAMQ output, and there's a difference, SAP is going to say that, almost inevitably, SAP is going to say that their output is accurate and everything else is not accurate. The thing to bear in mind, of course, is that SAMQ is accurate because it's basing its logic on what you've actually used in the system rather than what you're authorized to use in the system. And this goes back to the whole concept of what we've been talking about today. So there are a few questions along these lines, actually, that I can see. Our view, as we keep on saying, is that license based on what you need rather than what you've created in your authorization concept. And if you go down that path, then you know you're always going to have the most optimal licenses you need. I did read another question here, by the way, that said because someone's not moving to FUE, that this is not relevant for them. So just to let you know, the STAR tool was originally designed for the move from ECC to S4HANA. It's S4HANA on-premise or S4HANA with a hyperscaler. It of course can be used by the mapping to FUEs, but if you're moving from ECC to S4, then the STAR tool is very relevant in SAP's eyes. Just to answer that question.
Thanks for picking that up. Yeah, it says for everyone to know what it is about. Since we don't plan to convert licenses to FUE, most likely we'll stay on premise, so we don't need it. So that was what was referred to.
Previous comment from that person was if they can use the tool, our tool, to prepare for their S4 journey when it comes to authorizations, and definitely that would be SATQ, the role management solution that would be able to help clean up the authorization concept or prepare for the S4 journey. Definitely, that would be a good idea.
But also SAMQ does do the mapping from ECC world, S4HANA world to the FUE world. So a combination of the two is definitely the best approach.
That's another one that's actually going to SAMQ and implemented STAR logic. It says, but don't you have STAR logic within your tool? Can't you just do the consolidation within your tool? Why do we have to sort of use both? That's how I interpret the question. Why do we have to bother with STAR if SAMQ sort of can do the job? And I think that's might not be the right way to look at it.
Or maybe in the future. So currently we can upload the results from STAR, but we don't run STAR ourselves with our tool. This is something that we are discussing internally and how to adjust this in the future or do this in the future if we want to or not. We do use a version of the STAR logic to map in our tool the licenses to the activity of the users to the licenses, and that's a plan for the future of the discussion of incorporating STAR or not into the tool's logic.
If user has access, then that user is considered as professional user with full access without using access?
Yes. So if, like we had an example in a screenshot, if an end user role assigned to all users in the landscape has one object that will classify a user as a professional, it doesn't matter if the user accesses, logs on, the user can simply be completely inactive and hasn't logged on in a year. The user will still be seen by STAR as a professional. That's why you'll need to basically try to review the results and make sure that before you submit anything to SAP, it makes sense to you. If possible, you should clean up some of the authorizations to make sure that you don't agree to expensive licenses that you don't need. And sorry, there was one more question that can you know your FUEs without the STAR report? I mean, our tool does also the same, a similar mapping to identify your FUE need based on usage, not based on roles, but STAR is SAP's service to do so.
Does STAR help to analyze SAP indirect license usage requirement?
No. So it's looking at it's looking at the users. So you can choose dialogue users and other account types, but generally speaking, it makes sense for dialogue accounts. And generally, indirect usage would be users without such accounts who are not licensed will be doing activity in the system. So it does have some rule sets in there for users who are going to be engine users, accessing specific functionalities only. But again, my experience, most users in such a system are not just engine users. They might be active all over the place and require a license anyway.
Another one regarding SAMQ and actually SAP's approach to it. They're running SAMQ in their SAP environment. So this is a customer question basically. And could it happen that SAP would challenge or question the license assignments done by SAMQ during an audit, as the STAR tool would show different results? Because I think this works in layers as far as I understood it. Tony, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think this is the one we answered a few moments ago, actually. So, sorry,
no, I haven't engaged with this customer in a while. I think it was taken over by a colleague, but I don't remember if the customer is already on S4 licenses or ECC. But in the case, if the customer is on ECC, the audit or the measurement would take place based on the licenses in the contract. STAR would run to identify the needs in a conversion to an S4 contract or a cloud licensing solution or licensing contract. So I don't think that could happen or would happen. And as far as I know, STAR is not being used in audits, or at least not yet. I'm not sure what the plan is for the future. It's being used to identify, or if customers are interested in changing their contract, then to help them approximate the license needs if they were to switch to a full user equivalence or S4 license, is not to be audited using the STAR tool. So that shouldn't be the case as far as I'm aware. We haven't really had situations where SAP was questioning the results or the license assignment by SAMQ, unless there has been some, it's usually a conversation where they ask questions to clarify, and with proper answers that there's no issues with the license assignment.
And as you say, that we haven't seen situations where SAP is using STAR as an audit tool in order to penalize customers. You can argue that if STAR says you need 1,000 professional licenses in the S/4HANA world, and you only really need 300 because of usage requirements, then is that penalizing you? It's just a different way of looking at it. So do you need 1,000 professional licenses? No. Would SAP highlight that fact to you? Unlikely. So this is just something we need to think about.
Could we use SAMQ, our solution for optimizing roles, or SETQ actually, optimizing roles in ERP6? The company is about to start an S4 journey, but we know that our authorization concept is a bit outdated. Approximately 65% of users are apparently professionals, and we'd like to reduce that.
I think we spoke about this one, but I jumped ahead with the questions. Yes, so the SETQ solution would be more appropriate to help, clean up or update the authorization concept for an S4 journey.
But obviously, using SAMQ would give you the information to see the impact of what's happening in the differences between your authorization and your usage worlds. So again, we're optimally, is that a word? Using SAMQ to understand your real requirements, and then using that data to affect your authorizations. I think that would be a good way of doing it. A combination again.
Yeah, Joanna, thanks for picking up all of those questions in between, coming in from similar directions. And I'm trying to keep an overview here because there's quite a lot of interaction today, which I love. And another one is, do we have examples of the use of SAMQ during new projects in order to have an exact configuration of licenses from the start?
New
It's an
projects.
interesting question because SAMQ measures usage in the SAP system. So if it's a new greenfield approach, which I'm sort of assuming from the question that's what you're saying, then there won't be any usage for SAMQ to measure. We also have a lot of analysts in our environment, in the VOQUZ Labs world. So lots of advisors who can help you make sure that you license the right things up front. But SAMQ only measures what has actually happened, not what will happen in the future. Unfortunately, that would be good.
I just want to say that it's a little glass bottle there. How does the pricing concept of SAMQ and SETQ work, Tony? Can you give us a little bit of an insight so we get an idea of how to approach that, how to sort of look into the budget?
You mean how do we price it? But we have very simple pricing models, basically based on your users and how many systems we're connecting to. It's a very simple licensing model. And also we have different ways of selling our licenses as well. We have perpetual licenses, we have subscription licenses, we have to a certain extent project-based licenses, but our normal way of selling is on an annual or 3-year subscription model. Again, based on the number of users you have, predominantly based on the number of users.
We mentioned it before. If you want to have a first slide overview and test it, contact us regarding a POC. Write an email to labs@voquuzlabs.com, what you're looking for, and we're going to give you a tailor-made answer to that. But now you have an overview with Tony's answer to that question.
One point to that, Stefan. So as an organization, we really want to prove to customers that our tooling does what we say it does. And so the POC or the QLA, the quick license assessment, is a very, very inexpensive and quick way for us to demonstrate to customers the potential, the optimization potential in the environment. And it really does serve to give customers that security that they're making the right decision when they purchase our tooling. So it's something that we certainly recommend to customers. It's not something we shy away from. The QLA or the POC is definitely something that we recommend to customers. I mean, obviously there are customers who jump straight into subscription because they've heard about our tooling or they've been recommended. But the POC QLA is something that we're absolutely happy to go down that path.
So this is about being transparent, put us to the test. That's what you're saying. Do you have an idea on SAP API-based licenses / SAP CPI?
I'm not familiar.
This is sort of going off the topic. I put it in there. I'll follow up to actually clarify what exactly that question, where that question is coming from, and what the expectation is, and we're just gonna jump to the next one. Yeah. How do on-premise user types convert to FUEs on the SAP public cloud?
I mean, I think from a licensing point of view, public cloud or private cloud, the same FUE rules would apply. On-prem, is it S4 on-prem licenses or ECC licenses converted to full user equivalent? So there's as we said, STAR has a different rule matrix that says which license types users need based on their current authorizations, and we have a similar approach. But how do they convert from like a contractual point of view? I think based on the price, right? You can really convert your contract, and based on the license inventory you have currently, you can purchase equivalents, full user equivalents. I think we might want to clarify that per mail to understand the question better.
We'll follow up with everyone who sent in a question anyway to make sure everyone is as informed as it would like to be. And if there is anything we need more in depth to understand the question better, I'd ask you to send us an email again, and we'll answer that in detail. Do we have examples of the use of SAMQ during new? No, I had that already. That's a repeated one. That's a double. So let me just check another one. Okay, that's the same, also repeated and not related to the session, but what's your roadmap on handling SAP cloud licensing? How will SAMQ add value over SAP licensing usage and compliance view? You mentioned a couple of plans and might be actually considering whether to implement STAR in the SAMQ. Joanna, can you say something about this?
So we do have a roadmap also for cloud solutions. We are working on, we have some prototypes already, or it's built in the latest version of SAMQ, somewhat publicly, somewhat also not, to start rolling it out and testing it with customers before we publish it or advertise with it. But yeah, I'm not sure how much I should say about this right now.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we are aware of, and we're actively working on developing that functionality. How close we are to rolling it out, it's not going to happen this quarter. I guess I'll say that, but it is something that we're actively working on, and we want to have that functionality built into SAMQ sooner rather than later.
Good. That's all that we received. I mean, that was quite a lot actually that we received so far. I just checked the emails. A couple of the questions there are too complicated, so we need to sort of ask back and forth in order to clarify what's there to answer. For now, that's all in the chat. Any words from you for everyone, recommendations and final inputs on SAP STAR in combination with SAMQ, Tony and Joanna, before we close the session?
Okay, so just to prove this is live, I'm being kicked out of my meeting room.
Great. Good timing.
If there were any questions, then please obviously just reach out. I'll sign off now. I'll leave it to you and Joanna, if that's okay, Stefan.
Thanks very much, Tony. Yes, of course. Very funny, actually, understandable. Thanks for staying with us for so long. And apologies to the guys coming in. Cheers. Okay, let me just, something has come in.
Yeah, one more question.
Yeah,
similar to the API licensing question proposed. So are the licenses figures proposed by SAMQ being validated by SAP certified? Well, you can't really certify these kinds of outputs. So validated by SAP would be validated during measurement, right? So so far, we haven't really had situations where where SAP was questioning our results during audits or measurement requests, and so on, conversions for other customers. So from that point of view, they are validated by our experience with other customers and our other projects, but they're not certified. So I'm not sure if you can certify license outputs, but maybe just generally speaking, I think there were some really interesting questions or comments in the chat. So as Stefan said, if there's any more questions, you can email us. And I think if nobody minds, we might reach out to some of the people asking questions directly to clarify or to get more context on the questions or the comments. Some interesting comments there, as I said.
Yeah, we're also on us jumping back and forth and reading out questions first, so apologies for the confusion if you created some. We just wanted to get back to all of you. And Joanna is obviously able and capable of connecting questions that are coming from a similar background, so she answered those at once. And as she said, I'm just sharing the screen now. Have a look at the website, products and SAMQ to get an exact overview of what's happening here. We've got sort of very top level information. Even when you're watching the video, you would know what everything is about. There is a product sheet, there is a feature list, even a release info that tells you where we stand currently, what's in development, what has happened. And in case you need more background on that and have individual questions, here we go. With the POC, the quick license assessment as well. If you have more individual questions, then please address us with labs@voquuzlabs.com, and we're going to come back to you individually. Anything else from you, Joanna? Otherwise, we're going to close the session. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining. Goodbye.
Bye.